Right. Hello again, everybody. Today we are going to be continuing on with Module 18. This time we're covering Lesson 3 over the Aztec Empire. Before we talk about their religious and scientific and social systems, let's go ahead and take a quick look at where their civilization would have been located. And back to the map. The Aztec would have been this area in green on the map in central Mexico. Their capital city, Tenochtitlan, was actually where the capital city of Mexico City is located today. And we're going to be getting into that here shortly. But the Aztec eventually built an empire through warfare and trade, much like the Maya, and they created an impressive capital city in Mesoamerica. The very first Aztecs were farmers, but when they arrived in Central America, all the good farmland was taken. Rats. They settled on a swampy island in the middle of Lake Texcoco, built a capital, and started to conquer nearby towns. So they were really good at adapting to their surroundings and adapting to be successful. War was a key factor in the Aztecs' rise to power. The Aztecs built alliances or partnerships to build their empire even stronger. The Aztecs made people they conquered pay tribute, basically pay a tax to them by giving them cotton, gold, or food. And that also helped strengthen them. The Aztecs controlled a huge network of trade. Markets drew buyers and sellers from all over the Aztec Empire. And by the early 1500s, the Aztecs had become the most powerful state in Mesoamerica. They rose from living in a swamp in the middle of a lake to being one of the most powerful groups in this area. They did have some challenges to start out with. To build their capital city, Tenochtitlan, the Aztecs had to overcome a lot of challenges. And one of their biggest challenges was their capital being built on an island in the middle of a lake. The Aztecs built a causeway, which is basically a raised road across water or wet ground so that people could access the city. The Aztecs built stone canals to bring water to the city, and they created floating gardens called chinampas to raise food. It was just chunks of soil that would float on the edges of the lake by their island, and it was very successful for them. The city had huge temples, a busy market, clean streets, magnificent palaces. It was quite a city, and it was the greatest city in the Americas during the time of the Aztecs. As far as Aztec society, their society was divided by social roles and classes, just like other civilizations we've studied, but their families lived in organized groups. The parents taught their children the skills that they needed to know for survival and for life. The kings and nobles, the kings were the most powerful people in Aztec society. They were in charge of making laws, the trade and the tributes, as well as the warfare. The king had nobles that would help him manage the kingdom, so basically people he trusted to help him run things. And the nobles were tax collectors and judges, and they also performed other jobs as well. And the kings, when they were done, or any of these guys, when they were done with their job, they would pass their titles down from father to son. The next group would have been the priests and warriors. The priests had a great deal of influence over the lives of the Aztecs. The priests held many duties that included keeping the calendars to decide when to plant crops and holding religious ceremonies. Their planting the crops or agriculture was all tied to the religious ceremonies, and they believed that the gods impacted how successful their crops were. The Aztec warriors also had many jobs. They fought to capture victims for religious sacrifices. They also brought great wealth to their empire, and the warriors were among the most respected in the Aztec Empire. The next group would have been the merchants and the artisans. The merchants gathered goods from all over the empire and sold them to the main market, or sold them in the main market. But many merchants were very wealthy. They used their money to build large houses and to send their sons off to private schools. Artisans were also very rich and were important to the Aztecs as they made gold jewelry and elaborate headdresses that were worn by the wealthy in this society. Toward the bottom of society were farmers and slaves. Farmers and slaves were the lowest class. Most of the people who lived in the empire were farmers who grew maize, beans, and a few other crops. So again, not very many people were in a part of that upper crust in society. The farmers were very poor. They didn't own their own land. They could also become pawns and work for rich families. Slaves were people who had been captured in battle or people who couldn't pay their debts. The slaves did have the right to marry and have kids. They could also buy their own freedom if they could collect and save enough money. As far as religion goes, their religion required human sacrifice to keep the gods happy. And this was because that they believed that the gods ruled all parts of their life. They believed sacrifice was necessary to please gods, including their war god and the rain god. And the priests cut themselves to offer the blood to the gods and also sacrificed humans as well. Oftentimes, those were slaves that had been taken in battle. As far as their science, art, and language, they had very many achievements. The Aztecs learned from the people that they conquered. So not only did they just have their own knowledge, but they learned from other people as well. They created a numbering system, and they created a calendar very similar to the Mayan calendar. The architecture and sculpture made use of stone. The supplies that they had available to them is what they used. They made fine jewelry, and they were into weaving, basket weaving especially. They also had a very complex writing system. They also kept records in a very special type of book called a codex, and this basically kept record of their society, including their strong oral traditions, like riddles, speeches, stories about the gods, anything that told us about their culture. Their culture was found in the codex. And the downfall of the Aztecs. The Mayans, we're not really sure what happened to them. The Aztecs, we know exactly what happened to them. And a man named Hernan Cortez, a conquistador from Spain, came and eventually conquered the Aztecs. But a small group of conquistadors led by Hernan Cortez reached Mexico in 1519. The leader of the Aztecs, Montezuma II, believed that Cortez was a god. Part of their religious traditions was that their main god, Quetzalcoatl, would eventually come back and visit them, and the people were waiting for their god to come back. And when Cortez and his men arrived, dressed in armor that was kind of unusual, they had horses. They'd never seen horses before, so they believed that this was their god who had come back to visit them. So instead of being wary of them and being concerned about them being conquered, they welcomed Hernan Cortez and his men into their city, into their civilization. Kind of a mistake on their part. Montezuma even sent Cortez gifts, including gold. Cortez wanted even more gold, so he went to Montezuma. And Montezuma keeps providing since he thinks that Cortez is just a god. But Cortez takes Montezuma prisoner. The other Aztecs attacked Cortez and his men. The Spanish were eventually driven out, but Montezuma, their leader, was killed. Cortez returned with many Indian allies, and in 1521, they eventually defeated the Aztecs and ended their empire. All because they mistook Cortez for their god. They let their guard down. Some of the causes of defeat for the Aztecs. Oops. Computer froze on me for a minute. All right, causes of defeat of the Aztecs. The Spanish definitely had help from other Indians in the region. These Indians, they resented the Aztecs' harsh rule. They didn't like them, So if something happened to them, they didn't really care. The Spanish had better weapons than the Aztecs. They had cannons, armor, swords, horses. These are all things that the Aztecs didn't have, and frankly, they didn't even know existed. The Spanish were able to block Tenochtitlan's water and supplies off due to its unique geography. Remember, Tenochtitlan was the capital in the middle of this big lake. So they were able to block off the access to the outside world away from their island, and that did them in. The Spanish also had unknowingly brought deadly diseases like smallpox to the Americas. These diseases killed the Aztecs, who had never been exposed to such diseases. They hadn't been exposed, they hadn't built up an immunity to it. So that helped kill off part of the Aztecs. So, that concludes lesson 3 on the Aztecs. We'll be talking about the Inca civilization in South America next time we're together. Have a great day, everybody.